Good evening. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting tonight on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation and pay our respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge the many millennia of storytelling that have taken place on this beautiful country. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. My name is Veronica Sullivan. I am the director of the Melbourne Writers Festival, and it's my great pleasure and privilege to be hosting this evening's conversation with these three fantastic authors. Since you're here tonight, you're no doubt already a fan of one or more of them, but if any of them are new to you, I guarantee that you'll be buying all of their books by the end of this conversation. And that is both a promise and a threat.
Yes.
In case any of them are new faces for you, I will introduce them before we begin the combo. To my immediate left is Bri Lee. Bri is the multi-award-winning author of the non-fiction books Eggshell Skull, Beauty, and Who Gets to Be Smart. Her journalism, essays, and short stories have been published widely, and she's the creator and editor of News and Reviews. And Bri's best-selling first novel, The Work, was longlisted for the Indie Award for debut fiction. Her new novel is Seed. In the middle, we have Madeleine Gray. Madeleine is a critic and a writer from Sydney. Her best-selling first novel, Green Dot, won the ARBIA for the Matt Rochelle New Writer of the Year Award and the Russell Prize for Humour Writing. She has a PhD in feminist literary theory from the University of Manchester, and her new novel is Chosen Family. And finally, on the end, Kate Mildenhall. Kate is the author of 3 previous novels, Skylarking, The Mother Fault, and The Hummingbird Effect, which was longlisted for the Stella Prize and shortlisted for the ARBIA Literary Fiction Book of the Year. She's also the author of the children's book To Stir with Love. And for 6 years, she co-hosted the First Time podcast, interviewing hundreds of writers. Her new novel is The Hiding Place. So please make these 3 fabulous authors very welcome. We have an hour for our chat this evening, and we will leave some time for your questions towards the end. And Madeleine, Bri and Kate will all be signing copies of their novels at the end of the evening, and you can pick up copies of their books from our friends at Ramona Books up the back of the room. So these novels are juicy and we want to get into chatting about them, but we will, I think, try and avoid spoilers because I'm mindful that they're quite new and, as I said, people might not have had a chance to read them all yet. But we'll see how we go. We can talk around things perhaps, so if you've read it, you know, and if you haven't, the mystery will remain. Let's dive in. I'd like to start, and this is a dreaded question as we discussed backstage. I'm going to ask you all to tell us about your book in your own words, but I'd also like you to share, if you will, if you can cast your mind back to before you had written the thing and when you first started thinking about or writing it, if there was an idea or an image or a question that, no pun intended, planted the seed for the novel that would result. So, Bri, will you get us started? Tell us about Seed and where its genesis lay.
Okay, thank you, Ronnie, and thank you everyone for coming. Actually, this makes it easier for me to launch into my garbled elevator pitch. I first learned about the existence of the Svalbard Seed Vault, which is a real place, in 2020. And it's up near the North Pole, and it is a giant sort of concrete facility that houses a copy of all of the seeds in the world for when inevitably there is a natural and or human-induced disaster that we might replant. And I became obsessed with that place because to me it represented simultaneously the absolute despair and devastation of what we have wrought. And yet it is physically a beacon of hope and international scientific collaboration for the future. And it's also, I think, an extraordinary setting for something very intense because it's so remote and isolated and yet full of very, very sort of passionate specialists, scientists, etc. And I decided that I wanted to create a book that was set in a seed vault. And in 2020, around that time when I was starting to percolate on these ideas, I was sort of on either side of 30 and asking myself the question of whether I felt or thought that it would be ethical to try and have a child at this point in a climate emergency. And to me, that setting and that question so naturally began to plug into each other. So fast forward a few years, I went to Antarctica for a month in February of 2023. I decided that I would create a fictional seed vault set in Antarctica and that there would be 2 scientists there. So the smooth pivot into the elevator pitch for Seed is that our main character, Mitch, is a dedicated environmentalist, biologist. He has spent his professional life trying to undo some of the damage that humans have done. His expertise is in the low-lying plant life that has already gone extinct or is at risk of going extinct due to sea level rise. And the year that he and a team of 20 people spent originally building this seed vault called Antarctos down in Antarctica was the best year of his life. Like a lot of people I met down there, they find it difficult to reintegrate back into society. And his scientific knowledge and his beliefs about the terrible things humans have done manifest in him in that he is an antinatalist. So he believes that it is morally unacceptable to choose to have children. But then they get out there for the sort of final season, establishing the vault, just him and one colleague, and the helicopter doesn't pick them up. The radios go down. Shit starts getting freaky and weird and real, and it's about how absolutes become relative under pressure.
Beautiful. Thank you. Madeleine, what about you? Tell us about Chosen Family and where the kind of starting point was for you.
First of all, it sounds like Bri's protagonist would really hate my book. So Chosen Family was born of 2 main ideas. The first one is related to the child question. I was also at the time in my life where a lot of female friends were thinking, children, babies, should we do it?
Tick, tick. Yes, no, discuss.
Exactly. Yeah. Also climate emergency, etc. But the main issue for the women that I was talking to was more they didn't have partners and they didn't necessarily want to single parent or wait to find a partner at some stage in the future. And so we all kind of got to gabbing, as gals do. And we were like, why wouldn't you just have a baby with your platonic best friend? And why isn't that something that more people do? We have the infrastructure. IVF exists. Turkey basters exist. Bunnings is there, right there. Why aren't we actually kind of making true of the old mantra that it takes a village to raise a child? And so that was point number 1. Point number 2, or theme number 2, was that as a queer person myself who knows a lot of queer people, there's a common thread when you know someone long enough who's queer. Almost every time, eventually, they will tell you a story of when they had an intense friendship breakup in high school, and a female friendship breakup, and years later they look back and they think, I think I might have loved her. Whoops. And they're trying to kind of unravel years of shame and desire and love. And it's actually really complex, but queer people, when they're older, tend to treat it quite flippantly as a joke. And so I wanted to write a book that combines both of those things. So essentially I made my characters, my little dollies, to think through these 2 issues. So we have Eve and Nell, who meet in high school when they're 12. They're at an all-girls, private, very toxic school in Sydney, and they're both outsiders. And when they meet each other, it's that moment of, that beautiful friendship recognition moment when you think, I feel a weight has lifted. Finally, someone sees the world as I do. And it's, even if it's not necessarily sexual, it's romantic. It's that kind of just intense love for someone. And so then we follow Eve and Nell over 18 years in Sydney as they kind of both love and destroy each other. And the book works on 2 timelines. So we originally meet Eve when she's 30 years old, and she has a child, Lake, who's 7, and she's single parenting. We know that Nell, for some reason, is gone. So in a way, it's structured like a mystery. I am essentially Agatha Christie. And then...
But gay.
But gay. I was trying to gay Agatha Christie. Doesn't work.
Gag.
Agatha Christie. And then the other half of the book is structured like more chronologically from when the girls are in high school, and then the two halves eventually merge. So yeah, it's a love story that's also a friendship story that's also a painful and hopeful account of two people trying to be good to each other and failing for a long time.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maddie. Kate, take us there.
Both really good. My genesis story for The Hiding Place is that I tried to convince my darling friends who I've been friends with for a really long time, who I have camped with for over 30 years. I tried to convince them to buy a property with me, and that did not go well. But what I did do is I wrote a book about a group of friends who buy a property together. And part of what I wanted to do with this book is also that I spent a really long time writing the previous book, like 4 years, set over 250 years, and I was a bit tired. And I also was a little bit over being earnest. So I wanted to write a satire, or I wanted to try and be funny and mean, which is not my brand, so that was a little tricky for me. And I wanted to only set over 3 days. So The Hiding Place is a group of 4 families and all their associated many kids who go away to this new property, Willow Creek, for their very first weekend there. And they're going to set up the composting toilet, and they've got all their plans for sustainable living in an orchard, and they're going to set up some rules for how they're going to be the very best people they can be while they live on this property. And it's not a spoiler to say that by the end of the first night, someone is dead, and things go really south, as they do in your book, Bri, as well, from there. And, part of it was this idea of also wanting to chuck a dead body in the mix for my book. I want to be in the crime gang.
Sorry.
Like I literally...
Another Agatha Christie.
Yeah, exactly. I really did. I hung out with... I kind of like latched on to the crime writers in green rooms at festivals. They drink a lot generally, and they have a lot of fun. It's true, right? And they're willing to also reveal their secrets about how they do their things.
The way they talk
exactly.
The way they talk shop is extraordinary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Buy Chris Hammer a beer, and you've basically got the recipe for how to write a crime. So I wanted to try that. Because it seemed like a kind of a fun thing to do. But the thing that came up when I was pitching this great idea about buying a property together with my friends was the idea of how concepts and questions about money, about land ownership, about our Australian kind of obsession with property and buying property and having it, how parenting politics, how all these things can kind of be really big moments of tension in groups of people. So yeah, the dead body is a big issue, but the kind of other big issues are like, is the food organic, and how are we going to recycle the glow sticks? Those are the kind of...
Equally important. Yeah, amazing. You're all very good at that task, and it's almost like you've been on tour for a few weeks, night after night. And I feel like there's the unifying theme after listening to you speak about them in that way is what could possibly go wrong. There's a lot I want to kind of come back to and pick up on that you've all mentioned in terms of the kind of starting points for your novels, but it has been a really pleasurable and interesting experience for me reading these 3 books in conversation with one another. And I think there, as I say, there are some things that are shared kind of commonalities or that cross between 2 or 3 of the books, but there are also a lot of really fruitful and kind of fascinating spark-off points of maybe difference. So let's kind of get into some chewy things here. They're all very readable books, and I think the way you talk about them and the kind of the character-driven core of all of these novels is a really propulsive thing as a reader. But as you've kind of touched on, there are also these big capital I issues that are being considered through the lens of the characters. And that's, I think, the dual pleasure as a reader. Incredibly readable, but also makes you think. You want those 2 things. I do as a reader anyway. So we've got Maddie, as you said, chosen family being an exploration of family and friendship, and how and love and how sweet, but also how toxic those things can be. And Bri Seed is a thriller that interrogates climate change, equality, rationality, the antinatalism movement. And Kate, you've written a highly effective satire on class and hypocrisy and the urban-rural divide. So, Kate, I might start with you this time. How did you go about that weaving in of these contemporary social issues and all of these big questions without getting kind of bogged down by them and still keeping that pace and that propulsion going?
Part of it is the 80,000 words of the other campfire discussions that the grown-ups keep having when they're a little bit pissed that I deleted, that are off to one side. So one of the things that I was trying to do was to have all those conversations on the page, like have the conversations about land ownership or about money or about, you know, are we going to be stewards of this land or do we want a return on our investment? All those kind of questions, have the adults discussing them and getting fiery about them. So that was one of the things, is that I just had to take a bunch of it out. I think one of the risks in doing multi-POV, so mine's got 6 different character voices. It did have more, but Ben Ball, who I can see sitting up at the back there, my publisher, did convince me that it didn't need 12 points of view, which was a good move, Ben, thank you. But one of the things that you risk for your readers is that they'll like one character more, or they'll read for one particular character and then, you know, they'll just kind of move on. So one of the things then that was really important was just to keep it moving. And I think too, this thing about writing crime, I was reading a lot of crime, I was watching a lot of crime as well, thrillers, and just that propulsive pace that's in there, but also that excitement. And I watch a lot with my 2 daughters who are 12 and 14, that excitement of watching them as it comes up to a reveal, and that kind of 10 seconds before the reveal happens where they're like, oh my God, I got it, I know what's about to happen. That kind of addictive entertainment that I want to read for. And I teach a lot of writing as well. And one of the things that I say to my students is, we were talking a little bit about this in the green room, this kind of our attention is so drawn to so many things at this point in the world, and we could be doing a lot of things other than reading. And one of the things that we have to do for our readers is to try and keep them in the deep and continuous stream of the novel, and to not let them off the page for a bit, or that's what I was intending to do with this book. So, getting those voices right and making sure that there was a lot of action, which was fun. You know, I like a bit of action.
And I love even the as you said, like the 3-day span of the novel. You can see that the book's coming to an end and the weekend's coming to an end. So you feel this, you don't want the weekend away to end, even though a lot of terrible things are happening. Yeah. So you kind of have this mirrored content and form in that way.
It's a big weekend. You know, it's not a great weekend for all of them. One of the best bits of feedback I got was from another writer who messaged me, and she was like, I was looking at the book and I knew I only had 10 pages to go because I could see, and I was like, how are you going to wrap this up? And that landing the end, I think is, it's something so many writers stress about, and we work really hard to get it right, because you want a feeling of satisfaction. I think the other thing in a satire too, I was talking about this at an event last week, you know, my rule to myself was that I was going to take the piss out of myself and people like me first. So this is an absolute satire of middle-class, progressive, you know, somewhat inner-city Melburnians really, but I know that expands out. So that was my rule, but I didn't want to satirise friendship. Or long friendships. So I wanted to somehow be able to bring those two things together at the end, which I hope I've done.
Yeah, beautiful. Maddie and Bri, similar kind of question, I suppose, but I'm also particularly interested for both of you because, Maddie, you're also a critic and have done academic work, and Bri, you've written non-fiction books, and I want to know what you can do with fiction in terms of big issues, big themes that is maybe more effective or effective in a different way than approaching them through non-fiction. Maddie, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. First of all, in fiction, you can have a sense of humour. My PhD supervisor was so angry at me all the time because she was like, stop joking about phenomenology. It's not funny. And she was right. But I think what you can do with a novel that you can't do with non-fiction, or that I can't do with non-fiction, is to play around with form in a more inventive way. So in terms of and it also relates to the propulsion question that Kate was talking about, which is that my novel is, as I said, structured in 2 different parts, and they go back and forth between each other. So first of all, that was good for me as a writer because I could write a very long plot-propelled scene and then have a little break and go into more of a tableau present-day scene. And that just helped. Like, it was like toggling between documents. But what it also meant is that form can mirror thematics. So for me, so much of Chosen Family is about these two women whose minds and souls are almost like involuted. They flow in and out of each other, and their identities merge and disconnect at various times. And so the way that the novel is structured is, to me, and this is, forgive me because I'm going to use a very wanky word now, I was kind of modelling it on the idea of the palimpsest. Which I'm not the first writer to do this, but like a palimpsest, if you didn't get weirdly obsessed with this in 2017 like I did, it's like, a piece of parchment, you write with ink on it, and then maybe you have run out of paper or don't want to go to the shops, so you'll rub out the ink and then you'll write in the other direction. But over the years, the ink that's been rubbed out will oxidize and rise up, and it's like you have two texts merging together. And I think it's an apt metaphor for a lot of things, but memory and also the merging of two people when they love and understand each other. So I saw the structure of my book as attempting to emulate that. And the other thing I really wanted to do, something that was central that isn't so much of a thing in nonfiction, is tense, because my novel goes between past and present, but both sections are narrated in the present tense. And for me, that meant hopefully that both sections, even though one happened ages ago and one happened now, were existing in this kind of, to paraphrase Anne Carson, like in a state of like eros, like the moment before the moment, like kind of like what you were describing when your kids are so excited to get to the bit. It's that moment. It's the anticipation just before desire is like satiated. That is the ultimate kind of like juice of life. And so I wanted to get that through in the tenses as well in the book, which maybe is me like intellectualizing it too much now because I've been on tour for a few weeks, and it's possible that I wrote thinking none of that.
You're being the critic of your own work, the analysis that you would do as a critic. Yeah. Fabulous. Bri, what about you?
So the original question was essentially why fiction?
Why fiction? And I mean, there's a lot of, as you said, like you're inspired by the real Svalbard Seed Vault. There's a lot in here about real life movement, the antinatalist movement. But what can you do with fiction in terms of thinking and writing about those things that you couldn't do through a long form essay or another nonfiction book?
Yeah, definitely. So I don't really think about fiction and nonfiction as much of a binary. If anyone heard me talk about The Work, my last novel, then you would have heard me say this before. I set out with a question or an issue, and then I just choose whatever container best fits that inquiry. And I'm often trying to figure out what the best Trojan horse might be that will kind of both force and allow the reader to make it all the way through the book with me and think about things they might not otherwise or might not want to. And so with something, so an obvious example with Eggy is that I had strong messages I wanted to get through to people about essentially feminist jurisprudence. And there is no way as many people would have read an essay collection by a nobody as they would that memoir that was structured like an episodic TV show. And so when it came to wanting to explore very, very profound and I believe philosophical but also quite taboo ideas of antinatalism at this point in time, I knew that if I wrote nonfiction, it would be compartmentalized not only as just like one person's opinion, but my opinion, and that it would inevitably just immediately derail into ad hominem, either attacks or distractions. I wanted people to sit with the really complex, what I believe are like really complicated, difficult questions. I thought that they would be more willing to do that for many reasons with fiction, and specifically fiction that had this Trojan horse of like a page-turning thriller. And then once I begin, it's funny, you said like dolls, like you control them like little dolls. For me, what I imagine is that in those early stages, I'm building a sandpit. and I have questions that I'm burning to like explore and not necessarily answer in some kind of definite way, but it's a sandpit for the thing that I'm working through. And then the form and the function sort of grow into each other organically thereafter.
Fantastic. It's interesting you mentioned the sandpit, and I want to ask Kate about mapping and kind of planning. And because you have this web of characters, they're all interconnected, they've all got different dynamics with one another that are kind of entrenched and old, and you don't do an exposition dump, but you're kind of showing gradually how they fit together. How did you approach that actual process? Like, what does that sandpit or that process look like when you're building your characters and putting them in conversation and in relationship to one another?
I'm picturing you like a crazy mass murderer with the red string.
There were a lot of kind of maps, really badly drawn maps, and I love both the sandpit and the dolls, because at one point I had to go, and the kids are a bit bigger now and they don't have a lot of dolls, but I had to go and get their little collectible things and bring them all in onto my table, because I had to work out where the characters were so that they knew what was going on at any one time, because there's like 17 of them in the place. But
like Cluedo. It was Cluedo.
It was Cluedo. It was totally Cluedo with the deer hunter. But what's interesting about what you were saying there too, Maddie, about the two timelines and this idea of the past and the present, what was really important was that part of the dynamic of this group and their feeling that they know exactly what each other thinks at all times because they've known each other since they were 15 is really important, and it's also the problem for them. But I wanted to really clearly stay in the 3 days. So it made it a craft kind of problem for me in that the backstory had to be really short and sharp. So the other thing I've got heaps of is all this kind of backstory of how the characters met and how they fell in love, or the best friends or the sisters, that I worked through in a really slapdash, like chaotic shit words kind of way, but it's there so that I could understand that, and that was kind of just sitting in the background. So that was kind of one of those process things to get through. I'm really bad at spreadsheets, like the worst. But I did have to make a spreadsheet for beautiful Lizzie, who edits me, that had which characters know which secrets at what point in time, so that I could follow that down and make sure I wasn't stuffing that up. Because that's the hard bit in kind of a mystery thing.
You could almost have a cast of characters at the start of the book, potentially. But then I think as a reader...
You couldn't you?
What was the discussion at some point?
Looking at my
Hello,
publisher.
Ben Ball.
But I think as a reader, it's a pleasure you have to do some work yourself, right?
Do you know, I saw there were some people came to an event the other night, and they were such beautiful nerds, and they had like little Post-it notes and different coloured things, and they had drawn their own map of all the characters in the back, which felt lovely. But also like we should have put one in the front maybe. I don't know.
Maddie, you were nodding with recognition when Kate was speaking about all the background plotting and character drawing that happens that then goes out the window. Is that true for you as well?
Well, I mean, it's actually kind of, I was nodding in recognition. Maybe that's what I should have done.
Do you not delete?
So the way that the book kind of came to be, I started with the adults and I think, and this has been a controversial thing apparently that I've been saying at events, so take of it what you... Twin Towers didn't happen. I think that people don't really change from high school. I think that they change a little bit and they can grow, and life circumstances can, attenuate or shift things, but the characteristics that are the core forever. And so as an exercise when I'm writing adult characters, I often go back and write scenes of them specifically in high school classrooms because I want to see where, in a science classroom, is this person someone who was like illegally using the Bunsen burner, or were they like in the back really shy and being bullied, or these things kind of still weirdly ring true later. And so for this book, I started writing those scenes. And then I realized they were actually really important to the novel, and later on it wouldn't make any sense unless we knew these characters when they were that age. So then, I did fill it out a bit more. It wasn't just the original kind of slapdash character background. But it became then a story of adolescence as well as adulthood, which I was not expecting when I started writing it.
Those art class scenes are intense.
No, when I was reading in there, the swimming lesson, I was just like, it was happening at my toxic private girls' high school.
Yeah.
Oh,
You took us all back, thanks.
Like
We're
excited.
all now traumatized.
Yeah, well, thank you and sorry.
This is kind of progressing us quite nicely to Bri and talking about characters, because you're almost the other extreme from Kate, and that Kate's got this massive cast of characters, and you've got you've got a protagonist and one colleague / companion that he's at an Arctos with, kind of this pressure cooker environment. And so we don't have any kind of demonstration of his relationality with others apart from his colleague Francis, and their relationship is quite a weird kind of
find the words.
Repressed, but also like sexual and professional and kind of friendly. Like it's a very complicated relationship, but it's not a very open one. And so we're kind of trying to understand who Mitchell is, but we have to kind of rely on what he's showing us or telling us. And how is that a challenge in terms of what you allow the reader to understand of your character when he is so isolated?
Yeah, that was such a huge thing that only came through the writing. So there are, like Ronnie just mentioned, there are only 2 people in any of the scenes that we see, but the woman who operates the helicopter and drops them off, who is very heavily pregnant, we learn in chapter 1, so not really a spoiler, is his ex-wife. And what that creates is obviously it's like a pregnant woman is the Chekhov's gun. Like what happened here? And
I think we know how she got pregnant.
Or maybe it was a turkey baster.
Funny. And I didn't know it was going to be from Mitch's perspective until quite a way into the project when it wasn't working. I typed up about 30,000 words when I was in Antarctica, came back, put it to the side as I published and toured the work and everything. And when I came back to it, it was the draft manuscript that I had was infected with the same frenetic energy that the work was. And it was from these alternating perspectives, which the work also was. I was like, oh, this isn't working. And to make a long story quite short, I had presumed when I went to Antarctica that because it's the only continent that doesn't have a First Nations peoples, I presumed that also meant that it didn't have a literature. In Australia, we have actually the Australian storytelling history is an oral storytelling history, for example. But what I realized later is that the diary is the form of Antarctic literature. And I had dismissed that because I don't really give a fuck about the so-called heroic age of polar exploration. But all of those men kept diaries. And what's interesting to me is that in my lifetime, and I don't know if you guys feel the same, the diary as a form has been presented as a very feminine writing form and a very feminine writing mode. But when I went back and started really properly reading and looking at these polar diaries, I realized, yes, they were very true and real, but they were also extremely performative, and they were withholding as much as they were telling at any given time. And then I did a writing workshop about risk-taking with Charlotte Wood in this building. It haunts me. She was talking about risk-taking and separating on the page and off the page. And I just went, I didn't say anything, but she must have seen something come across my face. And she was like, Bri, you all right? And I said, yep, I'm fine. She goes, well, you've just had some kind of realization. Do you want to share with the group? And I was like, oh, I just realized that my novel actually has to be in first person. And everyone in the classroom went, oh. And actually, Kate, when you were talking before that there's a risk that readers won't like one of the characters, I was like, whoop, took that risk. And then I was like, and I've realized the first person has to be a man. And everyone was like, oh. But it was so much easier to philosophize, free of the spectre of childbirth. 1 in 3 Australian women, 1 in 3, I should say people, 1 in 3 people who give birth in Australia will be massively traumatized by it. And there's a way in which men philosophize so much more freely, I find, because they are not as bogged down in the quotidian of many realms and many modes. And the passages in the draft that I had that were coming through much more strong, that captured the strange sense of time and this plane of thinking were all Mitch's. And so things started falling into place. And that's when I scrapped everything that I'd typed up and began the whole book again, handwritten. Because the last time I'd handwritten anything apart from law exams was diaries, and just everything changed. And like the whole book came together in a matter of months after that.
You've talked a little bit about Antarctica, and I did want to ask you about just your experience going there and what that kind of place did for you, how it infected the novel. And I know it's probably it's a very large question, but if you're able to distill the experience of being there and how you kind of found that the place came to life for you to write it into the novel.
Something that I never could have anticipated was that the human mind is not used to looking out at such nothingness. And it does something strange to your psyche. I was there on the ship for a month. It does something strange to your psyche when there's nothing that you can anthropomorphize. It's not even like a desert where there are like sort of, well, Antarctica is a desert, but it's different. There's not even occasional scrub. There's not often ranges once you're really out of those sort of plateau type areas. And because there's nothing upon which your consciousness can gain purchase, the experience I had was that it forced you into a reflective, meditative memory state. And you are simultaneously looking out and looking in. And the other thing was that I've never seen more extremely the cycle of life and death so compacted. We would land on Cape Adare, Penguin Rookery, and every year they would build hundreds of thousands of new nests and lay eggs for chicks on the bodies of the carcasses of last year's dead. And in these huts where, 25 men lived in sort of 10 square meters for over 14 months, 8 months of those in complete darkness. And there was so much life in those huts that we physically visited. And yet so many of them died in those huts or died trying to make their way back to those huts. It was so extreme to have that forced meditative state and this life-death cycle. And for the whole month I was there, the sun never set and I had no contact with the outside world. No phone, no internet. That is a way of experiencing time and place that I had managed to capture in my diaries that I kept while I was there that was not in the typed up manuscript. And that was like the other huge signal to me that I needed to change my method to try and capture the reality of what I had experienced down there.
And you couldn't have written it without experiencing it.
Oh, fuck. If anyone writes about Antarctica without having gone there, they're a fucking phony. It's so unlike, we cannot survive there without extraordinary feats of engineering, science, and regular supply drops. And if any one of those goes wrong, we are dead really quickly. It's even different from the north, like the area around the North Pole. People live there. People don't live in Antarctica. It is not like another country. It's like another planet.
Yeah, amazing. Staying on place, Kate, I want to talk about the bush block that the characters do pitch in and buy together, and maybe about your relationship to camping and what their kind of relationship to the land is, because you've mentioned these, I suppose, urban ideals around property ownership, around being the kind of city crew who come up to the country and get their hands dirty. What does that represent for them? And what were you drawing on in terms of your own experience with camping as well?
Yeah, I like that. One of the things that I think potentially other campers in the audience might identify with is the strange feeling that you have about a sense of connection or ownership to place when you camp, particularly if you camp at a place for a really long time. that there is no way of quantifying, and particularly in Australia, settler colonial, that isn't really, it doesn't have any basis. And one of the things that happened to our group is that we camped in the same place for a really long time, for 30 years, on Gurnai country at Point Hicks. And in the 2020 fires, we got burnt out of there, and we had to evacuate really quickly, and we were all fine and we were safe, but the bridge burned down and all our stuff melted there. The kids' bikes kind of melted into the ground, and we weren't allowed to go back to pick that up because you couldn't get over the bridge, but also we weren't allowed to go back there. And there was this strange kind of misplaced grief because we didn't feel like we were allowed to grieve that place because we don't have a connection to it, except for this long-term kind of, I can smell it when I close my eyes. So that was something that I was interested in, and I kind of explored that through the idea of these squatters who are on the property when the city folk turn up, and they're on that strange bit of land, crown land, that abuts a river. And Mum and Dad, where they live out in Christmas Hills, live next to the Yarra, and it's always been a really interesting idea to my sister and I, and to Mum and Dad, that at the bottom of where we go down for a swim, there's this other place where other people are allowed to be. Of course they can, and they can get off in their kayaks, and they can maybe even camp down there, but it's a strange kind of relationship. So that's something that I really wanted to look at in the place. The place, like, I went to visit the property that I was trying to buy, and it's wild. It's near Walhalla, and like extraordinary mountain ash. It was an old mining town, so there's just this old pub that's there, but riddled with mines and kind of danger. But I think one of the things that was really important for me to do is that, the danger in this place comes from the people. And I haven't fully read BJ's article that she wrote recently about kind of rural crime and crime noir in Australia and the idea of place. But a few people have asked me about it in the context of this book. And the thing that was really important to me is that the place itself is benevolent. The place has no kind of concept of being scary or dark or doing evil to the people. It's the people who are doing that. And I was also interested, there's feral deer, which are a massive problem on the outskirts of Melbourne. There's an introduced species, like I'm obsessed with that kind of stuff and exploring it. And that felt the way that I could do it. And fence disputes. I mean, right there, like you need conflict in a novel. You chuck a fence in somewhere and that's it. That's all you actually need. So they were the kind of bigger ideas that I was thinking about, I guess.
Yeah. Beautiful. We're going to go to audience questions in a few minutes, but I want to ask all of you, I think this is very interesting, kind of thinking about the stages of your careers, and that for Maddie and Bri, these are your second novels, I should say, after very well-received debut novels. And I think for Kate, this is a kind of genre change for you, as you've said, like you wanted to do something that was a little bit different, maybe a bit more kind of fun and out there. So with that ambition or with that new stage comes the challenge of doing something different, or of thinking about how you're going to, follow up. And I feel like Bri and Maddie have both really slain that second book syndrome phantom, because they are fabulous
Believe
novels.
her.
Believe me, I cannot tell a lie. Yeah. I want to use that as a way to ask the question of what was the hardest part or dimension to write? What was the thing that challenged you or pushed you the most in writing these novels? I can see thinking faces, but is it... Maddie, does anything come to mind for you?
No, it's actually really easy to write novels. No, of course it was hard. It's hard. I mean, it was hard just first of all starting, because Green Dot was successful, and before Green Dot I was not, writing creatively was not the path that I was on. I was going to be an academic. That was my grand plan.
Good move, Maddie Gray.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it, but does it love me? Yeah. And so Green Dot went well, and then I thought, how can I ever write a book ever again, obviously? And I only know how to write the one I wrote. I don't know how to write another one. And I will say I have to credit my now wife to this, which is she's a musician. and she's, done lots of albums. And she just said to me, Maddie, like, this will never end. After every project you ever do, you're going to feel like this. And it's not just second novel blues or sophomore blues. It's every project blues. So you have to get used to that as part of the like undulation of being an artist. Yeah. So be kind to yourself, walk around, get inspiration. So what?
That's so beautiful. Be kind to yourself, walk around, get inspiration. Yeah. That's like most of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
So I just did that for a few months and I felt a bit better. And then even Nell kind of popped into my head. It all started. I found the quote that begins the book, which is an Emily Dickinson quote from one of her beautiful poems, and it just is, "My story has a moral, I have a missing friend." Mm. And that was what I knew I wanted the tone of the book to be. But yeah, in terms of hard, it was more just point of view, because in Green Dot it was a very solipsistic protagonist and it was a first person perspective. And this book is two people, mainly an omniscient narrator over 18 years. So I challenged myself there. And yeah, you can be the judge of whether I nailed it or not.
You do.
Nailed it.
Spoiler alert, you nailed it.
But how beautiful to have a creative cheerleader in such close proximity.
Yeah.
That is a special thing.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. Bri, what about you?
I'm going to risk a really wanky answer, which is that actually when I came to sit down and handwrite it, I was reading some Wittgenstein, and that comes through in the novel a little bit. There are heavy themes about sort of suicide and, well, the question, of like human extinction and should we extinct ourselves, all of that heavy stuff. Anyway, something I was always fascinated by that I read about years and years ago was that Wittgenstein kept journals, and on the left-hand side he would keep his personal diaries, and on the right-hand side he would do his work. And so when I started handwriting Seed, I started doing that. And every day I would turn up to my pages and I would begin with the diaries if I had things to write about there. And it was very, very hard, emotional work. And it was a lot of crying, frankly, in an inappropriate place, because my co-working space is not for novelists. I'm surrounded by people who manage private driving companies and not-for-profits and an industrial design firm. And then there's just me crying with like children's exercise books in front of me. And doing that work was actually really, really hard. And what it allowed me to do was be very, very selective with when I was choosing to put emotional truths of my own into the book and when I was not. It forced me to separate when I was crying about my own thoughts and feelings and when I was crying about something in the book. And sometimes the two would cross-sect, and most of the time they wouldn't. And it forced and allowed me to, I believe, get to emotional truths in the novel that are not necessarily autobiographical truths. Yeah. And that was such an extraordinary creative breakthrough for me that only came through the doing. And it was very hard to trust that process because I'm someone who has always really tightly engineered their books. And this is the first book I've ever written where I felt like I wrote it as an artist instead of an engineer. And those sort of 3 months of really intense work with the handwriting and with the two types of writing and letting it be what it was going to, I think it only came good because it was that hard.
Yeah, beautiful. That doesn't sound wanky at all.
Oh, thank God. Yeah.
Kate.
Mine was trying to work out who to kill, actually. And that's partly because I was very caught up in the moral and ethical dilemma of like killing the right person. which
Who
I
would
thought,
you kill?
yeah, right. Well, that, but we won't talk about that. But I did. Hayley Scrivener did a read for me. Amazing Hayley Scrivener, who wrote Dirt Town and Girl Falling, and she said, "Mate, in Australian crime, we just kill whoever we want." So that was great. So I went with that. But I think the other thing that happened, to be more serious, that was hard, but to be more serious, the moral centre, I guess, of the book is a teenager, Stella. And I had her right from the start. And she was a really powerful voice. And I always knew that this book was about the kids, calling out the adults' hypocrisy. And to get to that, there were just so many iterations of what happened, and I don't handwrite it, but I do keep a journal of my process, and at times it was really useful to go back up and see that was the kind of the matter of it, the heat of it is what Charlotte Wood would call it, was the kids and their capacity to see through the adults and what they were trying to do.
Amen.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so that's what
in
we kept
Maddie's
coming
book
back to.
too.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I was
Yeah.
saying to you that I
Yeah.
used one of those gorgeous scenes with Lake and her voice.
You're absolutely right there. The kids know what's up.
The kids know what's
Yeah.
up, and the quote, the Morris. I've got a Morris Sendak epigraph at the start talking about how adults tell tales and lies all the time, but the kids always know. And I've had that for years, and I didn't know what kind of project it fitted with, but this was the one.
Yeah, that reminds me how actors say that play school's the hardest gig in
Yeah.
the industry because kids have the highest
Yes.
kind of sense of bullshit meter.
Yes.
and
That's
are you all in?
Yeah.
Very prestigious, but very, very the hardest one apparently.
Yeah. I once had a builder at my place, and I was like, and he said, "Oh, my kids don't know I smoke." And I was like, "You're an idiot." Like, kids know everything. It's so true.
Yeah, exactly. We have some time for audience questions. So if you'd like to ask one or more of our fabulous authors a question, please raise your hand and Awilla Centre Usher will bring a microphone to you.
Do it.
While
Do
you're
it.
thinking about it, I have a question for Matt. Can you talk about that thing? Do you remember how you said that Lake in the book was like a court jester? That knowledge, but like a kooky knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's like what Kate is getting at as well. Thank you. I see Lake as like because we see her from like age 1 to age 7. So, and I very much like stole from Henry James here his character Maisie and what Maisie knew, who is able to just kind of somehow cognize what the terrible things that her adults are doing and sometimes not. But no matter how much she is able to put it into discourse, her heart knows the truth, which means that she always gets to the truth kind of askance. She gets to the truth in an interesting way.
Yeah.
And I see her like a court jester or like a Shakespearean fool, like telling the truth but in riddles. That's what I see children as doing.
Yeah.
Yes.
I won't try and tell my 14-year-old that though. She will take me down.
I think we have a question.
Thank you. You've all written a second or subsequent book in a different genre to what you've done before. So how would you identify your own writing style?
Great question. Chaos. I don't know, Ben, what would you say? I think that one of the interesting things about this question is that sometimes it's an outward-facing thing in that other people put the genres on it. So for booksellers, for instance, it's really frustrating because they're like, well, now your books are in all different parts of the bookstore and I can't just put them together. But to a large degree, a little bit like what you were saying, Bri, about the idea coming and then you finding the container for it, you get an idea and then you're like, oh, this shit, I'm going spec-fic again, or I'm going historical, or those kinds of things. But I really like the experimentation of it. I like the play of it. Like I keep on saying this, but it's really true. I had the most fun I've ever had writing a novel this time round. And I think that that's because I've loosened up a bit about the process and also because I just let the thing be what it wanted to be. So but genre comes from other people, not necessarily us too.
Yeah, I mean, like I would take any genre as long as you don't call what I do women's fiction.
Yeah.
Like I love women, but it's fiction.
Yeah.
Like,
Right?
No, yeah, just it's not my job
yeah.
to describe my own work. I just make it.
Yeah, that's my job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have another question? I'm
Every
going
question
to just
is-
follow on from that while maybe someone wants to raise their hand and the mic will come.
Yeah,
I see.
yeah,
Here we go.
yeah.
I shan't.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey, Maddie and others. I was really fascinated by this idea that what happens in high school actually does kind of fuck you up for the rest of your life. And I feel like there's that commonality maybe between your stories about being haunted by decisions from the past.
Yeah.
That seems kind of counter to this idea that you can move on from what has happened. I wonder if you could maybe talk to that decision that you made.
Yeah, I mean, the other night I kind of said that line, and a school teacher came up to me afterwards, and she was really shaken by it. She was very upset because she was like, "I'm trying so hard to shape these children into kind of better versions. Are you like being fatalistic and that they'll never change?" And she was really upset. And I tried to explain, because perhaps I didn't do a good job with that statement. It's not that I think people don't change at all. It's more like, in my book at least, those wounds of adolescent betrayal, they make a home in us for a while, at least. And we can even take them out over years and years of therapy. But there will be a hole, and it will, while we're healing, influence every decision we make. And I think that there is like, what I'm trying to get my characters to do by the end of the book, or just all my characters to do in all of my books, all my 2 books, is to understand that hole that trauma leaves in you can be, and now I sound like a self-help person, but it can be powerful too. You can acknowledge that it's there and then use that as your way to connect to other people. Instead of hiding it from people, you can show it to people and they can show you theirs. And that's where like real intimacy can be. But the challenge, is getting brave enough to show it.
Can I speak to that as well? That's amazing. And because I think that there's this flip side to it, and there's a character in my book who talks about this idea that, the problem with long friendships is that sometimes people just keep seeing you as your 15-year-old self, and you've got no chance to grow and develop.
Yeah, it's like when you go home at Christmas. And you're
yeah.
like, why am I my
And that can
worst
be-
self?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that there's something that's deeply sometimes problematic about that. And then there's something that is incredibly grounding about that too. And the fact that there's they make a comment in the book about how as adults they don't know what everyone's jobs are. Like, it's just because you just know them as the person who is the same as a 15-year-old. And I think certainly for me that one of the delights of that big and old friendship group for me is that in seeing the 15-year-old version of me, they keep me very bloody grounded, and they also have a sense of self that potentially sometimes I forget. And so I think that there's a flip side to it too, and there wasn't trauma there for me, so I accept that that's a privilege, but I think
No
that's
trauma
really
for you
important.
from high school.
I mean, there's some trauma,
We
but
have our winner.
Whoa, yeah.
not the trauma that causes holes in oneself.
Oh, sounds nice.
Bless.
Next question. There's one at the front here. Your
We can't
microphone will
see
come
you
to
all.
you. Good on you.
I'm sure you look beautiful out there.
Just in the scarf. Yeah.
Bri, I'm interested in the research that you did down at the Antarctic. You said you were on a ship for a month. So did you go with a scientific research expedition, and what did you learn?
Thank you. I did not go with the scientific expedition. I applied for that grant and was rejected. I got my first ever Australia Council, or what's it called now?
Creative Australia.
Thank you, Ronnie. I got a grant to go on what was a tourist vessel, but I will say with an extremely environmental and nerdy company who I deliberately chose. So anytime we had even half a day at sea, there would be marine biologists, historians, people who had done regular work in the subantarctic islands and Antarctica itself giving presentations. there was one guy, a Frenchman called Samuel, who had wintered over doing this like random particular field work with a type of bird that like spat really stinky stuff. And I was like, great, an hour and a half. I learned all of these interesting things. Like, for example, that at Dumont d'Urberville, the French Antarctic station, they have a separate fridge just for cheese. There's like just the richness of the quotidian detail that I got, not just from the landings on Antarctica, but from the people on that ship who were sharing their expertise and their knowledge. The fact that I had a 2-hour-long lecture about kelp, that makes it through to the book in like a very small amount, don't worry. But the fact that they call her a kelpie. All this, oh my God, the beautiful thing about finding a new hobby or a new area of interest that you need to research for your book is the lexicon. And then there was a library on the ship, which of course I scoured top to tail. And there was a book that I've not been able to find since called the Antarctica Dictionary. I read that thing from front to end, and just like so many words, new words that I'd never had before. I can't remember your question, I'm sorry. But it was a civilian vessel, a tourist vessel, but an extremely nerdy environmental one. And I got just as much on the ship as I did off the ship.
And I can say, sorry, but Bri knows this, and I think it's happened to other people. As soon as I had read the book, I've been getting a lot of like Instagram targeted ads. Like
5 people now.
Selling me on going to Antarctica. So if you're looking to find out how to do it, just read the book and you'll be told.
Ronnie sent me a screenshot getting advertised like, do you want to work in Antarctica over the summer?
I don't.
No. But you were the third person. There are now 5 people who've been targeted ads for that. Yeah, and they all send it to me. Anyway.
Maddie, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, Bri, am I remembering correctly? You said you have like a scent memory about Antarctica?
Yeah. Wow, more wanky. Everyone buckle up. No, I just, something I learned from writing the work actually was that I listened to a particular album constantly when working on the book, and only when working on the book. And now when I hear that any of the songs on Lux Prima, the album by Karen O and Danger Mouse, I am in a specific apartment in New York in 2019. And so going into Seed, I was like, I knew I had this extraordinary opportunity of being on the ship for 4 weeks. And so I picked this album called Blue Blue by Sam Gendel. And I played it every single day, every moment that I was in that room, like in the cabin on the ship. And then every time I worked on the book since. And I also every single day had a particularly, frankly, unpleasant tasting ginger seasickness lolly. And also I just bought a perfume in New Zealand right before we left. And so now it was kind of an accident for me. Antarctica smells like Gucci Flora. Because I was just like, which of these perfumes just smells so unnatural and like unlike anything else? And I sprayed it in my room every single day. Yeah. And now I have that perfume and a particular scarf that I sacrificed. And so like every single time I sat down to write Seed, I'd put this album on, suck this filthy lolly and smell this Gucci Flora. And I would be like, I'm in Antarctica. Like, I'm locked in. And then like be there again.
Cynthia Erivo does that for each role that she has. She'll have a different perfume that she wears while she's playing that particular character. And she did it in Wicked. She had a different one for Wicked Part 1 and Part 2.
Well,
just a fun fact.
Good enough for Cynthia. Yeah.
Maddie, we have been doing this all wrong.
I would. All I would advise is like pick a better tasting lolly. Yeah.
Beautiful. Sorry for the digression, but a very interesting synesthetic digression. I love it. We will wrap up though, and I would strongly encourage you to, if you have questions or you just want to have a chat and shoot the shit, sorry for the swears, please do so at the back of the room at the signing table, because books are available. Thank you, Ramona Books. We love you. You've got lots of copies there. And Bri and Kate and Maddie will all be signing copies. So thank you to the Wheeler Centre for having us tonight. You guys are the best. And please join me in thanking Bri Lee, Madeleine Gray and Kate Mildenhall.
And Ronnie.
Yay. Thank you, Ronnie.